Imagine a world where your voice could not travel farther than the walls of a room. If you wanted to speak to someone far away, you had to write a letter. Then you waited. Days passed. Sometimes weeks. There was no telephone. No instant call. No voice coming from a device in your hand. Then one man began to ask a strange question. What if the human voice could travel through a wire? His name was Alexander Graham Bell. Years later, people would remember him as the man who invented the telephone. But his story was not simply about one invention. It was about sound, family, failure, obsession, competition, and a lifelong desire to help people communicate. And the first person who inspired that journey was not a scientist in a laboratory. It was his mother. Bell was born on March 3, 1847, in Edinburgh, Scotland. He grew up in a family deeply connected to speech and communication. His father, Alexander Melville Bell, was a teacher of speech. He developed a system called visible speech, designed to show how sounds were produced by the mouth and throat. Bell's mother, Eliza, was a talented musician. But she gradually lost her hearing. For a young Bell, this was more than a family problem. It became a question. How could a person who could no longer hear music still understand sound? Bell spent time sitting beside his mother at the piano. He would play notes and let her feel the vibrations. He learned that communication was not only about hearing. It could also be about touch. That idea stayed with him. Bell became fascinated by the human voice. He studied how people spoke. He watched the movement of the tongue, lips, and throat. He experimented with ways to represent speech visually. But his life changed when tragedy entered his family. 2 of his brothers died from tuberculosis. Bell himself became ill. His family feared for his health. In 1870, Bell moved with his parents to Canada. They settled near Brantford, Ontario. The young teacher and experimenter began to build a new life there. And Canada gave him something important: space, time, and a place where he could continue his experiments. Bell eventually moved to Boston, where he worked with students who were deaf or hard of hearing. This work became one of the central parts of his life. He believed that deaf people could be taught to communicate through speech. He worked as a teacher and developed methods for helping students understand sounds. One of his students was Mabel Hubbard. She had lost her hearing as a child after an illness. Bell became her teacher. Over time, their relationship grew deeper, and they eventually married. Mabel would become one of the most important people in Bell's life. But while Bell was teaching, another idea was growing in his mind. He wanted to send speech through electricity. The telegraph had already changed communication. Messages could travel through wires over great distances. But telegraph systems usually sent coded signals. Bell wanted something much harder. He wanted to send the actual sound of a human voice. It seemed almost impossible. Think about what speech really is. When you speak, your vocal cords vibrate. Those vibrations move through the air. Your mouth shapes them into sounds. A listener's ear receives those vibrations and turns them into signals the brain understands. Bell wondered if electricity could somehow copy that process. Could a wire carry the vibrations of speech? If it could, 2 people might speak to each other even when they were hundreds of miles apart. That was the dream. But dreams are easy. Machines are not. Bell began building devices. He used magnets, wires, metal plates, springs, and vibrating parts. He tested different designs again and again. Most of them failed. Some produced clicks. Some produced strange noises. Some produced nothing useful at all. But Bell kept working. He also needed money. His experiments were expensive. He needed equipment, assistance, and time. One of the people who supported his work was Thomas Watson, a skilled young mechanic who worked with Bell in Boston. Watson became Bell's close assistant. Together, they built machines and tested them. The workshop was not a clean modern laboratory. It was full of wires, tools, batteries, metal parts, wooden pieces, and unfinished devices. Bell could spend hours thinking about one small problem. Watson often had to turn those ideas into physical machines. And sometimes Bell's ideas went in several directions at once. He was also working on a device called the harmonic telegraph. The basic idea was simple. If several signals could be sent over one telegraph wire at different frequencies, one wire might carry several messages at the same time. Bell hoped this would make telegraph systems more useful. But while working on the harmonic telegraph, another possibility appeared. Perhaps a similar system could transmit different sounds. That thought changed everything. Bell began to focus more seriously on speech. There was fierce competition. Other inventors were also trying to improve communication technology. One of them was Elisha Gray. Gray was an experienced inventor and electrical engineer. Another was Thomas Edison. The race to develop better communication devices was becoming intense. Bell knew that timing mattered. In the 1870s, inventions were not only about having a good idea. They were about building it. And then protecting it. On February 14, 1876, a patent application connected to Bell's telephone work was submitted to the United States Patent Office. On the same day, Elisha Gray filed a caveat related to a telephone design. The history of these filings became one of the most debated parts of Bell's story. Bell received U.S. patent number 174,465 on March 7, 1876. The patent described an apparatus and method for transmitting vocal sounds telegraphically. But Bell still did not have a practical telephone that could easily carry normal conversation. He needed a breakthrough. It came in Boston. Bell and Watson were testing equipment. Bell was in one room. Watson was in another. They were working with an electrical device that used a thin vibrating membrane. Bell was trying to make the system respond to sound. Then something happened. Bell spilled acid from a battery. He needed Watson. He called out to him. And Watson heard Bell's voice through the device. The famous words are often remembered as, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Whether every detail of the story happened exactly as later accounts described is debated, but the important event is clear. A voice had traveled through the machine. For Bell, this was the moment when an idea became real. The machine was no longer only a collection of wires and metal. It could carry a human voice. Bell had crossed a line. Now he had to show the world. On March 10, 1876, Bell successfully transmitted recognizable speech using his telephone apparatus. Only a short time earlier, this had seemed impossible. Now two people could speak through a wire. The first telephone was not beautiful. It was not small. It was not easy to use. It did not look anything like the phones we know today. But it worked. And Bell understood what this could mean. Imagine hearing a familiar voice from far away without waiting for a letter. Imagine a businessman speaking to a partner in another building. Imagine a doctor speaking with someone miles away. Imagine families separated by distance being able to hear each other. The world was beginning to change. Bell demonstrated his invention publicly. People were amazed. At the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition in 1876, Bell demonstrated his telephone. The exhibition celebrated new technology and invention. Bell's device attracted attention. Even Emperor Pedro II of Brazil became interested after hearing a demonstration. The telephone began moving from a strange laboratory experiment toward a real technology. But success brought conflict. Bell faced legal challenges from other inventors. There were many claims that someone else had invented the telephone, or had developed important parts of the idea. The patent battles became complicated and lasted for years. Bell's supporters defended his patents. His critics questioned parts of his claims. The invention of the telephone was not a simple story of one man working alone in a room. Many inventors contributed to the development of electrical communication. But Bell's patent and his successful demonstrations placed him at the center of the telephone's early history. The Bell Telephone Company was formed in 1877. Telephone exchanges began appearing. At first, using a telephone was very different from using one today. You could not simply pick up a smartphone and choose a contact. Early users often depended on an operator. You would speak to the operator, give the number or name you wanted, and the operator would connect your line. Telephone networks slowly spread through cities. People began to understand that communication itself was changing. Distance was becoming less powerful. But Bell did not stop with the telephone. That is one of the most interesting parts of his life. He continued to work with sound and communication. He became interested in aviation, medicine, education, and many other areas. He helped establish the Volta Laboratory in Washington, D.C., where he worked on inventions related to sound and communication. He also experimented with devices for recording and reproducing sound. His curiosity kept pulling him toward new problems. And sometimes his interests were unusual. Bell became fascinated by flight. He studied birds. He watched how wings moved. He experimented with kites and aircraft designs. He built large tetrahedral kites and explored their structure. Later, he became involved with the Aerial Experiment Association, which supported early aviation experiments. Bell also worked on hydrofoils. These were boats designed to rise above the water on underwater wings as they moved forward. The ideas were ahead of their practical time. But Bell was never comfortable staying with only one subject. His mind kept moving. He also cared deeply about education. His work with deaf students remained important to him throughout his life. He believed communication was one of the most powerful tools people possessed. Yet Bell's work with deaf people is also part of a more complicated history. Some of his views about deaf education and the use of sign language are strongly debated today. He supported oral education and opposed some forms of deaf community separation. His ideas influenced education, but they also reflected the attitudes of his era. So Bell should not be remembered as a perfect hero. He was a complicated person. He made important contributions. He also held views that many people today would question. That is part of understanding history. The real Bell was more interesting than a simple legend. He was curious. He was ambitious. He could be stubborn. He could become deeply focused on an idea. And he was willing to spend years chasing questions that other people thought were strange. His greatest gift may not have been a single machine. It may have been his habit of asking, what if? What if sound could travel through a wire? What if people could communicate across great distances? What if flight could be studied scientifically? What if technology could help people who had lost their hearing? Those questions pushed him forward. And one of them changed the world. The telephone did not instantly become perfect. The first machines were limited. The networks were small. The equipment was expensive. But the basic idea was powerful. A person's voice could become an electrical signal. That signal could travel through a network. And somewhere far away, another machine could turn it back into sound. The distance between two people no longer had to be silent. Over the following decades, telephone networks expanded across cities and countries. Technology improved. Switchboards grew. Lines became longer. Phones became easier to use. Eventually, the telephone entered homes, offices, trains, cars, and almost every part of daily life. And then something even more remarkable happened. The telephone became portable. Today, Most people carry a device in their pocket that can send voice, video, photographs, messages, and information around the world in seconds. Bell could never have imagined the full form of the modern smartphone. But the basic question was familiar. How can one person communicate with another person who is far away? Bell spent his life trying to answer that question. Alexander Graham Bell died on August 2, 1922, at his home in Nova Scotia. When he died, telephones were already spreading across the world. His life had begun in a home where his mother could no longer hear normally. It ended in a world where millions of people could hear voices through wires. That journey is what makes his story worth remembering. Bell did not simply build a machine. He helped change what people believed distance meant. Before the telephone, distance often meant waiting. After the telephone, distance could mean a conversation. And that change began with a simple human sound. A voice. A voice that wanted to be heard. And a man who wondered if that voice could travel farther than anyone had ever imagined.